couple of other things I think which going forward we need to focus on. I think we need to democratize the executive. The executive and the judiciary were copy-pasted from the 1935 Act, unlike the legislature. And they still retain a very colonial structure. I have been many times to the Masuri Academy. They take ordinary human beings and convert them into believing that they are superior people simply because they passed an examination. And then they are sort of, entitled and licensed and capable of ruling all of us. So we have to really attack these feudal ideologies that still exist in the executive branch. We have to democratize the judiciary in terms of its process, its appointments, its internal culture, which is still extremely feudal also. And a lot of work, to be fair to the judges, they are receptive to this, and a lot of work and thinking, at least consciousness is coming up there. We need to revitalize democracy in politics by having inner party democracy and much more vibrant democracy. Now, parties are getting democratizing simply by splitting and forming new parties. But we must ensure that it remains, that politics is not captured by power brokers, which is what has happened now. That is a big danger to the Constitution. They have no ideological commitment. They will also sell out the Constitution to the rich and the powerful. The media must be democratized. We must have reservations in the media. There was a policy, at least as a voluntary policy, there was a conscious policy. I talk of the United States simply because everybody is familiar with it and it's easy to talk about it. It's not at all a perfect country. There's still a lot of racism and bad things there. But some good things to point out. In the 70s, they took a policy decision that every newsroom, prominent newsroom, news broadcasts must have African Americans, minorities. So you'll find now all the newsrooms have African Americans because it's a matter of conscious policy. Similarly, we must insist that the media must say that 70% of their editors, 80% of their anchors must be from OBC, SC, ST. If we have to watch them, if not, we will not be able to watch them in a way that reflects the realities of our country. Academia must be democratized as we go forward, and you all know that very well. We are sitting in a university. Universities are also run by small, powerful sort of groups. We have to democratize that, and that's not the time to talk about that. I'm just mentioning these few ideas, and I think the key challenge is I think to understand that we have something to defend here, the ideology of our constitution and the idea of our republic. That is what has brought us forward. We have to, as Professor Kancha said, further develop it, build on it, strengthen it, give it, bring in new ideas moving forward, and develop new theory. And one of the new theories is we have to find a new way of understanding, and I'll end with this, Hinduism. Because we cannot dismiss the kind of idea, Professor Kancha, that was expressed in the question answer session, that in fact, see, and we'll just say, I want to say, pose this question: why is the Hindu Kush mountain named Hindu Kush? From very ancient times. Now, we were told that we are all called Hindus because the Arabs could not, the Persians could not pronounce S, although S is in the middle of Islam. So I don't know why they can say S for Islam.
S at initial part, they say.
No, but that's all. That's not. Salman is their name. Salahuddin is their name. The S is everywhere. They don't have a P, as in, like in Gopal P. They have only a B. But S is. So that's not correct. Why is the Hindu Kush range called the Hindu Kush? Now, if you research it, you'll find that one of the explanations, I'm not saying it's correct, but the only explanation I have seen is that Kush means killer. So Hindu Kush mountains were called Hindu Kush because it means Hindu killer. Now what is Hindu then? Apparently the word Hindu refers to the dark, it means black and dark people. So the people who are living in today's Afghanistan, Pakistan and those areas, native to those areas, they face the Hindu Kush mountains, and they saw on the other side of these mountains are Hindus, these black and dark people. And the explanation I read is that sometimes these people would go, these were peaceful tribal people who believed in what Professor Kancha called spiritual democracy, I call spiritual anarchy, which is what I'm a spiritual anarchist. I have the freedom to believe that, this is my God and nobody can question that. And, Brahmanism and these other organized religions, Islam, Christianity, are all telling me what I should believe, but I'm a spiritual anarchist, right? So these peaceful spiritual anarchists living on the other side, some of them were caught and brought as slaves. But when they were brought through these mountains, they died. But they could not survive the cold. And that's why these mountains are called Hindu Kush mountains. Now this means that we are the real Hindus. I'm saying in this interpretation, we are the real Hindus, if it means dark and black and so on. And there are people who are not so dark and black, who are from that region, who at some point colonized us. And as was suggested, maybe claimed they really didn't have as wonderful and colorful and spiritual anarchy, like intellectual anarchy produces fantastic results. Great inventions, great science. All this great science we are seeing in the West came from sort of anarchic thinking, which refused to, what was Galileo? He refused to think within the box, so he said, no, what you're saying is wrong, right? So these people came and discovered amazing ideas, amazing philosophy. So there are scholars who say, Ramayana, Mahabharata, you say that Krishna and Rama are Aryan because they are mentioned in the Ramayana, Mahabharata. But there are scholars who argue that these documents are simply taking the stories of the local Hindus and writing them up. So naturally they would figure there because it was not their stories. And what they brought with them, as he pointed out, did not survive. Most of it did not survive. But they have been very, very effective in making us accept all this. Now, whatever it is too premature for us to come to a clear understanding, and I'm not postulating a clear understanding. I'm simply saying that one of the things, if our main goal is to democratize the Hindu social order, we cannot do it without reforming the Hindu theology, the Hindu belief system. That's what Narayana Guru fundamentally did in Kerala. He reformed Hindu theology. And Hindu ritual, sacrament, how you pray, who prays. So, and he said anyone can pray, you don't need a priest. Right? So without these reforms, we cannot go forward. So we need also a great intellectual effort to come up with our own understanding and approach, because a lot of people here own this religion. This is their religion. We cannot take it away from them. It has been already once stolen from them. We cannot steal it again. We have to protect it. So we have to theorize it based on their religion, respect for their heritage, their history, their sentiment of the common people of this country, and truly democratize Hindu theology and the Hindu social order. So we have a wonderful challenge of democratizing various aspects of our life, including the judiciary, and the need to democratize the judiciary is to ensure that its role of defining what is right conduct and wrong conduct is drawn not from Brahmanist ideology, but from the ideology of the Constitution. That is our goal in reforming the judiciary. Let me stop here and take any questions. Yeah. Any questions I can,
just pass on those ribbon scripts to us. You better write the questions instead of you who are asked. Hand mic, please.
Sir?
Yes, sir.
There is a clear line between literature and history.
Sorry, sir?
Literature and history.
Literature?
And history, there is a clear line.
Yeah.
So that is why when the Ramayana is considered as a literature, then we cannot think of the history. Also, Rama is the role in the Ramayana to protect the Brahmanism and the Dharma of Hindu. Is it yes or not?
Sir, I think, see, we have to decide, is Hinduism a way of life, in which case it's not a religion, or is it a religion? Is Ramayana literature? Is it a holy book? So, see, we have to decide that, and not anyone else. We have to have a consensus on this. Now, Hinduism is the only religion in the world which is named after a river, even if you accept that. Every religion is named after a prophet or a religious belief or some religious principle. A religion named after, so therefore it's clear that there's very little evidence as to say it's a river, it's really a religion. But today it has been accepted as such. So today what people see, your question of distinguishing between literature and history itself reflects a very admirable, rational, scientific approach. But a lot of people don't accept that approach. They don't see a difference between history and that's what we are seeing now, in academic institutions, plastic surgery and all these things, that, we are blurring the distinction between myth and fact. So we have to fight that, because that's where materialism comes in, right? So we have to ensure that we go back on the path of rationalism and materialism and fact, and not be drawn into myth and illusion.
Yeah, one more question from here, sir. Parliament appointing.
Yes, sir.
Judiciary,
Yes, sir.
as it happens in America, in last 2 weeks nothing but Kavanaugh, how his character and his ideology is being.
Sorry, sir.
This,
Kavanaugh. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
the last 2 weeks nothing but Brett Kavanaugh in America. Will the Parliament appoint to judiciary, top judiciary, be a process of democratic judiciary you are talking about?
Sir, it's a very, as one would expect from someone very senior like you, a very profound question. I'll just say there are many models, but in every democratic country in the world, the people have a voice in choosing the judges. Again, using the US example, you also referred to it. At the state level, nearly 90%, 87% or so of judges are elected in an election by the people directly, not appointed by Parliament. The federal judges are appointed by Parliament, nominated by the President. President is also elected, Parliament is also elected, Senate is also elected. So two elected of a set of officials are deciding on the judiciary has no role at all. There is no perfect way to do it. But what we need is, regardless of, first of all, we need as a matter of principle, we need democratic voice in the selection. How to do it? Should it be, so I can think of some variations, only Rajya Sabha, not Lok Sabha, maybe a committee of Rajya Sabha, not the full Rajya Sabha, can approve, the collegium can recommend, but must be approved by like the Judiciary Committee or something. We can think of various models. But the most important thing is there must be, which is what is going on with Kavanaugh, a very deep inquiry about the ideology and the character of every judge. Because this has huge consequences. Today, the judge, because of the theory of judicial review and basic structure, the judge has the power to change the constitution. And so we must have a much more serious process to select. What it should be, we should debate. Maybe we should have many debates around the country where people should say how do they want to select the judges. But it should not be by party leaders. There should not be a whip. It should be democratic.
Yes, sir.
Sir. Yes, sir.
So I agree with you, the last part of your lecture
Yes.
regarding we believe that the so-called symbols of gods, goddesses, beliefs, customs, and what are all these spiritual cultural aspects have originated themselves among people, and they were transmitted across the generations, not created by any single individual. So can we believe that there were already these indigenous symbols very well popular among people across the Indian subcontinent, not to stop in Vedic forms, which were later just picked up by these foreign invaders,
Yes.
so-called the Brahmin, Arya Brahmins, and they just intelligently using these symbols, replacing the original ideology with their hegemonic technology. So that it's just like, let me give you a very simple example of they are trying to own up even Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, even today 21st century. They use very effectively his photograph among Dalits and Dalits. They preach the complete Arya-Brahmin philosophy as if Ambedkar endorses the philosophy. And there are many among us, including very educated, we are falling into that trap innocently, unknowingly. I think this is the same. It is the only strategy the Arya Brahminists have implemented for the past 3,500 years, since 1500 BC, just using
Sorry to interrupt. Let the questions be brief, sir.
Yes, sir. That's,
We are in want of
half a minute. So all these, those social, spiritual, religious things which are popular in history are already there in indigenous masses, which are just intelligently used to propagate Arya-Brahmin ideology. Can we take the history like this? This is my statement, sir.
Yes, sir. Very, very good question, sir. You have formulated the answer yourself, and I've learned from you. Your explanation is very, very good.
Yes, sir.
So,
We are Hindus, not the Arya-Brahmins.
that's what I'm saying, sir. I mean, according to so what we have to, why is the Hindu Kush mountain called the Hindu Kush mountain? This is my question. For a very long time, much before any of this, it's called the Hindu. So that means we are the Hindus. If that is correct, then we are the Hindus. So, but what I want to say, sir, is that if you take the history of Christianity, for the first 237 years, it was simply a wonderful, non-violent spiritual movement of the wonderful theology of Jesus Christ. And then it became so powerful and popular that it started to affect the Romans, and then Constantine comes and takes over that religion and converts it, and suddenly the cross, instead of being a symbol of suffering of the poorest people in the country, becomes a sign of power, in the hands of Constantine. So I think a lot of people have and continue to use religion as a very powerful source of political power, and that's, in my view, that's why I said Brahminism is a political project. It is not a religious project or a social project. I agree with that. And so therefore they've used all these tactics to advance a political project. My submission to you is the 1950 constitution and the mass struggle of the people that led to that constitution for more than 100 years has defeated that ideology. Now we have to ensure that that last finishing touches are made by ensuring that the new ideology, which is the ideology of the people, democratic people, is diffused through all aspects of our states and all aspects of our life. Democracy is not just voting every 5 years. It is diffusing the idea that all power, and by the way, this is said in the 8th paragraph Objectives Resolution of the Indian Constituent Assembly, drafted by Nehru, which says, as most important principle, all power and authority of independent India and its organs shall be derived from the people. This is the cardinal principle. I've argued that it must be part of the basic structure of the Indian Constitution, if there is a basic structure. So every aspect of our life, any policy, public policy decision that is made, political in nature, legal in nature, must be derived from the people demonstrably. That's what we have to achieve in the next generation. And I think we will do that. I'm very optimistic that people like you, we will do that. Yes, sir.